Welcome to Ingredient Insiders. I'm John Magazzino.
And I'm Andrea Parkins. Thanks for watching this clip from our interview with Chef David Nayfeld. For the full episode, find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Links in the description below. Are your roots in Italian food? Like, how did you decide? And are you from California? Those are two things I always wondered and never knew.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised right here in the Bay Area, right?
Okay, got
So
it.
my family came as Jewish refugees from the former USSR.
Mm-hmm.
During their refugee process, they got like this holdover in Rome for a number of months, and it was very interesting. Growing up in my house, there was all these little kind of nods to Italian culture. My dad loved the way they dressed. My parents loved the music. Even the slang and kind of like terminology. I remember my dad as a kid, my dad would say "bambino" a lot, which is like very strange for like a Russian guy to say. But like that was like that was something they fell in love with and kind of brought into our home. So, and I think it would be a little too gratuitous for me to be like, and that's where I learned how to cook Italian food, right? Like, that's not it, right? Like in my house, it was still Russian food or Georgian food or
Uh-huh.
Uzbeki food or like whoever, like the elderly, like Soviet lady in our house would be like cooking. Like, that's the type of food we would eat. And then honestly, I grew up eating Mexican food. Like, Mexican food was my absolute love language from childhood until till today. So I never did very good in school. ADHD was like a real tough thing for me to surmount. And back in the day, we kind of didn't know how to address that. And honestly, people were just like, okay, lazy or doesn't care or troublemaker or whatever. And they didn't know how to turn on that part of your brain, which was the hyper focus, the thing of like, oh no, I can actually do something for 24 hours in a day, and you can't. You just have to find that thing that releases the dopamine inside my head, which is this dopamine explosion for me shucking peas.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you asked me to sit there and read a paragraph of this book that has no real kind of like emotional resonance for me, I cannot retain the
You're
information
off to the
to save my
races.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone. And so, for me, I was like, okay, how do I make up for this insecurity I have about the fact that I never did good in school? I couldn't get into a college. I had friends who would go to college and go to law school and do all this stuff, and that just wasn't in the cards for me. So the way I kind of went about it was, I was like, okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my resume with all these places that all the most fancy people in the world want to go eat. And then I'd go, work at Nobu when there was only one Nobu in Tribeca 20 years ago, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like this big, beautiful global brand that they have, right? And Robert De Niro would be walking into the kitchen and patting everyone on the back and saying hi, and it was like it was insanity. I'd go work, for Joel Robuchon, both opening the Las Vegas three Michelin star restaurant and working for him in Paris. I'd go work at 11 Madison Park and for a bunch of years, and then go throughout Europe and all these different things. And, the truth is, I think as young chefs, we start to convince ourselves that, this is the food we love. And secretly, we keep having these like love affairs with places like Roberta's, right?
Mm.
And that was my story, right? I would be working at 11 Madison Park, and every week I would be going to eat at Roberta's. Every week I'd be eating at Franny's. Every week
Mm-hmm.
I'd be, going to these places, and at a time 11 Madison Park was under the Union Square
Mm-hmm.
hospitality group, and we had these things called Danny dollars, right? Where you could go spend like your free dollars at one of the other restaurants. And I remember going to like Union Square Cafe and just being like, man, I love this food. But you kind of don't give yourself permission to cook that food, because it's like you went to this like you it's like you went to Harvard or whatever like school you went to, and then you were like, hey, instead I want to be a school teacher, right? And when the truth is that might really be what you're passionate about. It might be the thing that you're really, really in love with. But you're like, oh, but I did this thing and they don't equate. So I went to Harvard Business School, so I actually need to go work at like, Deloitte.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask most people at Deloitte, right, is this making you super happy? Like the chances are they're probably saying like, no, not really. Like, but like I feel accomplished. And so I went to Europe after working at EMP, and I was there for a year. Overstayed my visa. I worked at Mirazur in the south of France in Montom, which became the #1 restaurant in the world. And then I got to go see like Albert and Ferran Adria, Quarento Uno Grades, and tickets and stuff like that. And then slowly, what would happen as, for example, I'd go to Paris and I'd go stage at Frenchy with Gregory Marchand, and I would see the chaos in the kitchen, and it's this tiny little space, and they're feeding 40 people, and they'd write the menu on the board that day based on like the rhubarb that came in or whatever, or the red mullet. And I remember just tasting the food that was being done like so much more passionately and so much less methodically, and it was based off, don't get me wrong, you can't do it if you've been cooking for 2 years. Gregory Marchand has been cooking for years and years and years, and he had such a depth of knowledge and fundamentals to pull from that when he was doing it passionately, it just came off as this incredible vibrance, and execution was at super high level. But I remember tasting it and being like, man, this is exciting food. And dinner was different than lunch was. And I remember coming back, and I think something had fractured in my thought process. And I came back still with this thought of like, oh, I got to open a fine dining restaurant. And then that just started to unravel a few months in. And as I started to look for a project to open and finding, the former auto body shop that was on Divisadero, I remember being in LA and eating at Bestia, having that
Hmm.
same experience at Bestia that I had at Roberta's, and then eating at Bucato, which was Evan Funky's
Mm-hmm.
restaurant that he had in Culver City, and just sitting there and being like, this is really what I love. I love eating it at every chance I'm getting. I'm not at home making these composed dishes with tweezers and all of these Bocuse d'Or like type, techniques, or this nouveau Nordic
Right.
piles of powders and dehydrated things, right? Like I'm doing this type of food. Why don't I just give myself the permission to cook the food I love? And that was kind of the journey that brought me to cooking Italian food. And in 2013, I made that decision that I was just going to spend. Basically, the way visas work for anybody who hasn't traveled is usually a tourist visa lasts for about 3 months. And so you can just buy a ticket to most places like Italy and just go for 3 months unencumbered, right? And so basically, my whole thing from 2013 was go do events or go consult for a company or whatever, get enough cash, go to Italy for 3 months, work in a butcher shop in Puglia, roll pasta in Bologna, make pizza in Naples, travel around and see everything, eat everything, write everything down, take 20,000 pictures. And I did that consistently 2 to 3 times a year until we opened K Fico, and I continue to go. I'm going to Tuscany in May, and every time now I go, I get to bring members of my staff. I'm taking the chef de cuisine of K Fico, Parco Menlo, to Tuscany in May, right? For us to go for a week there, because I think that is one of the most incredible things you can do for yourself is like go and see the diversity, right? Like of the different regions and the different towns and the different houses and the different restaurants.
Love it.
I mean,
Did you ever think about doing Mexican?
I would 100% do Mexican. But I want to devote the same amount of time and energy to it. And I grew up eating it, and I've traveled to Mexico many, many times, and I grew up with Mexican families and cultures, and so I am very familiar with the regionality and the vernacular and the and the different ingredients and so on and so forth. But I'd want to devote the same level of energy to it, and so I will do it one day. It needs to be the right place, right time, right thing where I can really spend the prerequisite amount of time honoring it. And look, it's got to be the right thing, right? Like it's not gonna feel right for white boy David Nayfeld from East Bay, California, doing taco shop in Oakland next to so and so person who's been doing tacos their entire life.
Hmm.
It's not going to come off right. So there's got to be a way to do it that's authentically me, which is telling my story of being like the son of California that grew up eating this cuisine. And authentically, I can probably tell that story through my own lens. I need to figure that out one day, and I will.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ingredient Insiders.
You can find the products we discussed on today's episode at chefswarehouse.com or your favorite specialty retailer.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Ingredient Insiders and Chef's Warehouse at Where Chefs Shop.